Hello and welcome to Module 9, a step-by-step guide to multiple graphs. So let's look at what we're going to do in this module. We're going to look at two bar charts and a pie chart in the same question. So sometimes you will just get a bar chart, or you will just get pie charts, but sometimes you will get two different types of graph in the same question. So we're going to look at how to deal with those in this module. And just like the other modules, we're going to look at these things step by step to talk you through how to do these types of questions. So in the last module, we looked at pie charts, we looked at a step-by-step guide for how to answer pie chart questions, and we looked at how to answer table questions. So here are the two charts that we're going to look at today. On the left, we have two bar charts. They're about the same thing. They're about internet speeds in 5 Australian cities, and there are two dates. And then on the right we have a pie chart, and it is showing the different types of internet connections people had. So this would be contained in the same question, and you'd be asked to report the key features of both of these. Now, because there's so much information on the screen, I'm going to look at both of them separately because I want you to be able to see the different values, the different percentages. But in the real test, they would be beside each other, just like this. So let's look at the bar chart first. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and analyze the bar chart. So pause the video and analyze it. Okay, so let's look at my analysis. First thing we ask ourselves is it over time? No, it's not over time. It is two separate dates. So it is in 2005 and 2015. So it's not between 2005 and 2015. It's just in those two particular dates. What's the title? It is about internet speeds in Australian cities. So how fast someone's internet is. The categories are the 5 different cities, major cities in Australia. And the units of measurement are megabytes per second. So it says that at the bottom here, megabytes per second, and it says Mbps here. So we're just going to refer to it as Mbps or megabytes per second. And the purpose is to compare 5 cities. So it's to compare 5 cities in 2005 and compare the 5 cities in 2015, and then it's also to compare the two dates. So it's to compare 2005 and 2015 to show the differences, how they have changed. Next we'll look at the pie chart. So pause the video again and analyze this pie chart. So the date is 2010. It's not over time. They're not showing 2 different dates or 3 different dates. It's just one date. Title is the type of internet connection, so it's the kind of internet connection. So this is different from the bar chart because this is Australia as a whole. It's not talking about different cities. It's talking about the whole of Australia, and it is the type of connection: broadband, dial-up, mobile, or no connection at all. There are 4 categories which we just mentioned. The units are in percentages. Of course, most of the time pie charts will be in percentage. And the purpose is just to compare the different types. So it's to compare broadband, dial-up, mobile, and people who don't have any internet. Next, we need to move on to identifying the key features of each graph. We don't need to look at the graphs together. Most of the time, nearly all of the time, in IELTS Task 1, if you get multiple graphs, you don't have to look at them together and compare them together. They can be related, such as internet speed and type of internet, but that doesn't mean you have to compare them together. You don't have to look at the key features together. So what you should do is just look for 1 or 2 key features in one graph and 1 or 2 key features in the other graph. If you had 3 graphs, you would just look for 1 key feature in one graph, 1 key feature in the second graph, and 1 key feature in the third graph. But because there's 2 here, We're just going to look for one or two in each of them. So pause the video, have a look at the information in the graph and try to pick out two key features. Okay, so my key features are they all increased. Remember, we're talking about the overall trend. And the second most noticeable thing about this is that Sydney has by far the fastest internet. It's about triple the speed in 2005 and about double the speed of its nearest rival in 2015. So that's a significant. So those are the two things we would mention about that. Those are the two things we'll put in our overview. Now for this, I want you to pick out two significant things for this. So pause the video and pick out two significant things. My first significant thing is most people have broadband. So at 62%, that is significant. Most people use broadband. But a significant proportion of people use mobile. So that's quite a big chunk of people. More than a third of people use mobile. So those are the two very, very easy, very obvious things that we would pick out. This is a good way to demonstrate that you don't need to pick out really complex things or some things that are difficult to figure out. Just the two most obvious things about this graph, and you report them in your overview. Next, I'd like you to think about the structure you would use. What would be the most logical way to structure this answer? So of course you're going to have paragraph 1 is your introduction, paragraph 2 will be your overview, but how would you structure paragraph 3 and 4, your details paragraph? What do you think you would do? What would be the most logical thing to do? So I'd like you to pause the video, have a look at these graphs side by side, and think about what details you would include and how you would organize those details. Okay, so here is my structure. Paragraph 1, introduction, of course. Paragraph 2, key features of both charts. So the key word there is both. Okay, so just simply state the two main features of the bar chart and the two main features of the pie chart. Paragraph 3 will be details of chart 1, the bar chart. Paragraph 4 will be details of chart 2, the pie chart. This is the most logical way to organize them because there are about two different things. So if you get two different graphs, always just put one graph in one details paragraph and the other graph in the other details paragraph. Very straightforward. It's the most obvious thing to do. It's the most logical thing to do. So the introduction, here is the question, not the introduction. The graphs below show the internet speed in 5 different Australian cities in 2005 and 2015, and how Australians connected to the internet in 2010. So this is how I have paraphrased it. The bar chart displays how fast internet connections were in 2005 and 2015 in 5 cities in Australia. And the pie chart illustrates the type of internet connection people in Australia used in 2010. So, keyword there is a very simple word, and. What we've done is we've just taken one graph. This is our first graph. We've paraphrased it. Then we've added the word and then we paraphrase the second graph. Very, very simple. So there's no need to worry about these multiple graphs. They're actually more simple than just normal ones, I think. Overview. Overall, internet speeds increased in all 5 cities between 2005 and 2015, with Sydney having a much faster connection than any other city in both periods. In 2010, most people connected to the web via broadband, but a significant proportion used a mobile connection. So we start off with overall because we want to tell the examiner it's our overview. Internet speeds increased in all 5 cities. This is our first main detail. Sydney having a much faster connection. This is the number 2 thing that we include in our overview. Most people connected via broadband. That's the third significant thing, the third key feature. And a significant proportion used a mobile connection. So those are our 4 key features that we have just explained. No data, in our overview. So details, number 1, so this is going to be about the bar charts. In 2005, Sydney had the quickest internet with a speed of approximately 13 megabytes per second, and this increased only slightly to 14 megabytes per second in 2015, but was still the fastest by nearly 8 megabytes per second. Melbourne's connection nearly tripled from just over 2 megabytes per second to nearly 6, making it the second speediest in 2015. Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane's speeds increased to just under 6, just over 3 and just over 2 respectively. So let's look at what I've done in more detail. Most of the information that I give is about Sydney. Now Sydney is the thing that we included in our overview. So things that we include in our overview tend to take up a lot of room in our details paragraph. So what I've done is simply take what I wrote in the overview and I have just added details. So 13 megabytes, 14 megabytes, and then I've made a comparison. So this is a comparison, but was still the fastest by nearly 8 megabytes per second. So that's comparing it with all of the other cities in 2015. The next thing I do is talk about Melbourne, because Melbourne is the next most significant thing because it is the one that increases by the most. So it nearly tripled. And then I say 2 megabytes to nearly 6. And then I make a comparison. Second speediest in 2015. So there's 2 significant things in that paragraph. I've said that it made the biggest gain, it nearly tripled, and it became the second speediest. So that is why Melbourne is, after Sydney, is the most significant thing in the bar chart. The next thing you'll notice is Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. They're not as significant as Melbourne and Sydney. And we don't need to say Perth increased from this speed to this speed, Adelaide increased from this speed to this speed, and Brisbane increased from this speed to this speed. We just need to say what they increased to in 2015. So under 6, just over 3, and just over 2. These are the speeds they increased to in 2015, because Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane are not that significant. And we don't have to include every single piece of data in both the bar chart and in the pie chart. Remember, if back to the table that I showed you, you don't have to include everything. Sometimes you do, but most of the time you don't. You only include the most significant data. So I have just included a little bit of data because we need to talk about all the categories. We need to talk about each city. But I've just used the word respectively to allow me to do it in a very short way, to do it in a very succinct way. So let's move on to details paragraph number 2. In 2010, the majority of people living in Australia used a broadband connection to surf the net with 62.09%. However, just over a third of people used a mobile device to access the internet, whereas a very small percentage of people either used dial-up or had no connection at all, with 1.48% and 0.89% respectively. Now this is an example of when you should really include all the data, because there are only 4 pieces of data: 62.9%, just over a third, 1.48% and 0.89%. There are only 4 pieces of data, so it's no problem to include all of them. Because if you didn't include all of them, you wouldn't talk about all of the different categories. So I'll underline the categories in red: broadband, mobile, dial-up, and no connection. So that each of the 4 categories is mentioned because we need to include the categories. But each category only has 1 piece of data, so it's no problem to explain all the pieces of data for this. So if we put it all together, you can pause the video and you can read this, but let me just briefly go through it. We introduce both graphs in the introduction in 1 sentence. We take 1 or 2 key features from both graphs and we put them in the overview. Then this is the first graph. This is a bar chart. We explain the most significant features in more detail. And then this is our pie chart, the second type of graph, and we include the significant features in more detail in that. So let's look at some key lessons to take from this module. Include both in the introduction, so don't have, some people try to write one introduction for one and another introduction for the other. Don't do that. Just one sentence and introduce both of them by paraphrasing the question. The question will always introduce both of them. Pick one or two key features for each graph and report these in the overview. You shouldn't have any more than 4. So if you have 2 graphs, just pick 1 or 2 features from each. If you have 3 graphs, maybe just pick 1 feature from the 3 graphs. But the rule is no more than 4. Okay? Never have more than 4 key features in your overview. Write about the first type of graph in details, paragraph number 1, and write about the second type in details, paragraph number 2. Very, very simple, very logical. That's your structure for this. And you don't have to include everything. So we didn't include everything when we were writing about the broadband speeds, when we were writing about the speeds in the 5 different cities, because there was a lot of information. We don't have time to write that amount of information, so we just picked out the most important information. However, in the pie chart, there was only 4 pieces of information, so we did include everything. So you have to judge when you should be including lots of detail and when you shouldn't be including lots of detail. So in the next module, we're going to move on to grammar and vocabulary, and we're going to focus on the specific type of grammar and vocabulary you need for charts and graphs. Okay, I hope you found this module useful. Goodbye.